The NFL head coaching cycle is almost done, so in this video, let's go ahead and grade every single hire up to this point. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into it. So real quick, I did say earlier in the intro that almost every team has hired a new head coach. The only team that we are currently waiting on for a hire is the New Orleans Saints. Now, of course, I will be putting out a community post once this team does officially hire their new head coach, but of the names they have interviewed, I don't really like most of them. They've interviewed guys like McCarthy, Kellen Moore, Darren Rizzi, Mike Kafka, and Anthony Weaver, not to mention Joe Brady, but Joe Brady has declined the position. So of the names available, you're looking at guys like McCarthy, Kellen Moore, and honestly Anthony Weaver, and I truly don't like most of those hires, especially with where this team wants to go. With that said, I do think the best of those names might be Mike McCarthy, but we'll have to wait and see. With that said, we are going to begin with the Chicago Bears, who just hired Ben Johnson, and I think that this is an awesome hire for the Chicago Bears. Now, simply put, I did not think the Chicago Bears were going to be able to pull off a Ben Johnson signing simply because, well, for starters, Ben Johnson was from Detroit, and of course, that's a divisional rival, so I didn't think he would want to have to face the Detroit Lions twice a year, as well as I had question marks with the general manager position for the Chicago Bears, but of course, they got the job done, and well, Ben Johnson is now the head coach and offensive genius for Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. Me personally, I think this is an awesome hire because you compare Caleb Williams with a young established head coach who is an offensive genius. You have somebody who is a creative play caller who's going to utilize the tools and capabilities of Caleb Williams as sort of an out-of-pocket, genius, somebody who can just make some big splashy plays here and there, while also hopefully honing in Caleb's ability to dissect defenses with his mind, dissect defenses with his arm, and of course, with Ben Johnson, you're establishing a culture of running the football down the throat. Of course, offensive line play is going to be massive for the Chicago Bears moving forward, so we all can kind of suspect what's going to be happening with the Chicago Bears this offseason. I expect a bunch of offensive lineman signings, draft picks, as well as potentially going after a guy like Ashton Jeanty in this year's draft. I think that the philosophy that Ben Johnson works with in today's NFL is a little bit of a throwback, but also with a modern twist on it. His passing schemes are extremely fantastic and make guys like Jared Goff look like MVP quarterbacks. And if Caleb Williams is the quarterback that we think he can be, I really do suspect that he's going to have a really good season under Ben Johnson next year and in future years. With Ben Johnson's, again, run it down your throat mentality, I really do think it's going to benefit a team like the Chicago Bears, who have desperately needed an identity on the offensive end for years. Basically, ever since like Brandon Marshall and Jay Cutler, this team has just been trying to find a guy who can lead this team to the promised land. They thought they had it with Justin Fields, it just didn't work out. They thought they had it in Mitch Trubisky, it did not work out. I think a big reason why those quarterbacks didn't succeed was the head coaches who were not directing their offense around their quarterbacks. But now you have a guy in Ben Johnson who might just have the perfect quarterback for his system, so I think that this is truly an awesome hire. I'm going to give this hire a solid A. Next up, let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars taking in Liam Coen as their new head coach. Now, this one is actually a really interesting story. In case you guys don't know what happened, Liam Coen interviewed with the Jaguars. He didn't want to take the position. He was going to go back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this was because there was question marks of whether or not Liam Coen would want to work with a guy like Balky, who was at the time the general manager and somebody who was running a lot of the operations. Inevitably, Liam Coen goes back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they begin talking about a contract extension for Liam Coen to stay in Tampa Bay and be the offensive coordinator for years to come. Then, out of nowhere, Balky gets fired by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Liam Coen, under the radar, goes back to interviews with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and of course, ultimately ends up taking the job. Now, the process of Liam Coen going under the radar and not letting the Buccaneers know that he was going to take the position, I think is kind of a bad look for him, and honestly a bad look for the Jaguars as an organization. So I don't like the process in which they got the job done, but ultimately I do like the connection of Liam Coen going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Similar to Ben Johnson, I think his system, I think his offensive philosophy is really up to date with the modern NFL. And when you have a younger quarterback like Trevor Lawrence, who hasn't really had that offensive minded head coach in his career, you're finally getting a guy in Liam Coen who could potentially be that type of guy to him. Again, I wish things would have went a different way. I wish that he would have been a bit more transparent with the Buccaneers and just honestly been a bit more respectful regarding the situation, but it did not happen. But ultimately, I do think that Liam Coen going to the Jacksonville Jaguars is a really positive thing. Could it end up backfiring? Yes, potentially, but every single head coaching hire could end up backfiring. I just personally view Liam Coen as a really solid fit with Trevor Lawrence and what Trevor Lawrence is trying to do at the NFL level. I feel like thus far through his career, Lawrence hasn't necessarily been given the greatest shake in the entire world because he's had some offensive line issues. issues, some defensive issues. He's had inconsistencies with his receiving cores and also has had some inconsistencies with coaching. But now you get a guy in Liam Coen who hopefully can be the guy in future years and can hopefully lead this team going into the right direction. I feel like this Jaguars team isn't terribly far away from actually being somewhat kind of decent. You have your wide receiver one, you have your quarterback, you have some pretty solid running backs. I feel like your offensive line has some pieces you can work with, and same thing with the defense. So I think if you really just nail this offseason and next offseason, this team within about a year and a half to 2 years can actually be pretty darn good. With all that said though, I do think this is a really good hire. It's not like an A+ hire because there are some unknowns with Liam Coen because he's only been with the Buccaneers for 1 year and has only been like a true candidate for about a year now. So I'm going to give this hire around a B+. Moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders taking Pete Carroll. Now this one was a bit of an opening that was a bit shocking. I really thought that Antonio Pierce was going to keep his job for at least another year because I feel like he had a really poor roster to work with last year, but ultimately they fired the general manager, they fired their head coach, and they just wanted completely new fresh faces in the building, and I can't necessarily say I blame them. This is not a team that in my opinion has a terrible culture. I think there are other teams out there that have much worse, but ultimately I do think the hiring of Pete Carroll is somebody who I think can sort of fix the culture 100% while also just being a steady body in that head coaching position. The only reason why I don't love the hire is because, well, Pete Carroll is one of the, if not the oldest head coaches in the NFL and likely won't be on this team past like maybe 5 years. And that's not because I think he's going to like pass away or anything, but he's probably just going to retire because, well, he's going to be getting older and probably wants to go to bed early and not have to worry about facing the Kansas City Chiefs on a Thursday night. So again, I like the hire of Pete Carroll. I just don't like the longevity of how long Pete Carroll is probably going to be on this team, which may actually end up being kind of a good thing for the Raiders in terms of like, I think that Pete Carroll could be somebody who stays around for 2 to 3 years, fix the roster, fix the culture, gets the team going in the right direction. And maybe while he's doing so, he's developing an offensive-minded coordinator who could potentially become the head coach one day or something along those lines. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Obviously, Pete Carroll is an extremely experienced head coach who has been successful everywhere he's gone. So I think that this coaching hire is a really good hire. It's just kind of a bummer that he's up there in age and probably won't be on this team for too long. With that all said, the AFC West is absolutely stacked with head coaches. You got Sean Payton, Andy Reid, Harbaugh, and now Pete Carroll. That is just 4 of some of the best head coaches in the NFL and in NFL history. So that division is going to get so much harder if the Raiders can figure out their quarterback position. But ultimately, because I am a little bit worried about how long this hire is actually going to be effective for, I'm only going to give this one a B. But if Pete Carroll was like 60, I'd probably give it a good A- or A. But then we get to the most controversial hire, and in my opinion, the worst hire of this video. The Dallas Cowboys taking Brian Schottenheimer to be their head coach. Now, I'll say this. I'm extremely excited for Brian Schottenheimer. He has been trying to get a head coaching job for many years now, and I think there has been a little bit too much slander regarding his name and regarding his time in the NFL. I think that he has been a somewhat successful coach in the NFL in terms of he's gotten to the pinnacle of being an offensive coordinator for some pretty good teams like the Jets when they had their good years with Sanchez, and I believe he was the offensive coordinator a few years with the Seattle Seahawks. So I do want to give him his respect in those regards. With that all said though, this is just not a good hire. Again, no disrespect towards Brian Schottenheimer. He is an NFL coach for a reason, so he knows the NFL game at a very high level. It's just the simple fact that he wasn't even the play caller for Dallas last year. You had a guy in Mike McCarthy who is at least pretty well respected and has a couple other job interviews to become a head coach elsewhere in the league, and you let him get out the building and you didn't really have a backup plan. I just really don't like the process the Dallas Cowboys took either, because they let Mike McCarthy go about a week after a lot of head coaches started interviewing for positions. You can't get a deal done with Mike McCarthy, so you're about a week behind on talking to head coaches and whatnot. Then you only interview 4 candidates, and of those candidates, 2 of them were somewhat of internal candidates, those being Kellen Moore, who was once an offensive coordinator for Dallas, obviously Brian Schottenheimer, who was already the offensive coordinator in Dallas. You interview Robert Saleh, who is one of the only external candidates that you did hire, and then you also interviewed some special teams coordinator for Seattle, which I believe was some sort of rule in the NFL. So this team really did not do their due diligence on figuring out who should be the head coach of this team moving forward. Say what you want about the New Orleans Saints. Yes, they're taking their sweet time, but at least they've interviewed over 6-7 people at this point. So they're ultimately going to find the head coach that is the best fit for their team. Whereas the Dallas Cowboys, they kind of just picked the one guy who was already on the roster and has already kind of proven to be a good fit with the guys. The issue with this is the Dallas Cowboys haven't been able to get over the hump with their actual offensive coordinator in Mike McCarthy. What makes me think they're going to be able to get over the hump with Brian Schottenheimer? Again, I want to give Brian Schottenheimer some flowers. Congratulations on getting the job. Congratulations on probably nailing your interview. But for the Dallas Cowboys, this was arguably your most massive offseason in terms of a head coaching hire in years. This is a Cowboys team with so much talent that is just ready to win and ready to try to go out there and win a championship. And you're banking on Brian Schottenheimer to be the guy moving forward. Schottenheimer has never been an awesome offensive coordinator. He's had some success, but has never been a consistent, really good offensive mind out there. And with a head coaching cycle where there are so many awesome candidates, you don't even really get to interview any of them. They didn't interview Aaron Glenn. They didn't interview Vrabel. They didn't interview Joe Brady, Liam Coen, Ben Johnson, Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick. They didn't interview none of those guys. And all of those guys, in my opinion, would have been better hired. So because of that, I'm going to give this one a D+, and that's only because I've heard that Dak Prescott likes Brian Schottenheimer, but this is a really bad hire. I'm not going to give it an F because an F hire would be like hiring Jason Witten to be your head coach, which, by the way, it sounds like Jerry Jones really wants it to do, so that would have been an F, but at least Brian Schottenheimer does have some level of familiarity with the NFL, has been in this league for many years. It's a D+ hire, though. Moving on to the Patriots signing Mike Vrabel to be their head coach. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on this because I think I've already talked about it in a past video, plus this hiring has been marinated on for a couple weeks now. My thought process behind it is the Patriots got a really good head coach in Mike Vrabel. He's just somebody who can elevate talent around him. I think he's an awesome offensive and defensive mind wherever you really need him to be. He just understands the game well. You don't have to worry about time clock management. You don't have to worry about culture building or anything like that. This is also a reunion. He's obviously been with the Patriots organization for many years as a player, has a lot of familiarity with the staff, with the ownership, and so on and so forth. The only reason why I'm not going to give this like an A+ to an A is because I kind of feel like the Patriots are just kind of retreading waters that they've already kind of done before. Obviously, once Tom Brady left, there was still the Patriot way, the Bill Belichick way that has been sort of, beloved and cared for many years. But once they went to Gerard Mayo, they kind of did the same thing of, oh, we're doing the Patriot way, we're doing the Bill Belichick way, just with somebody else. And now you're getting Mike Vrabel in there, who I think is going to install some similar philosophies to Bill Belichick, which is a good and a bad thing. I think it's a good thing because Belichick was extremely successful, and Vrabel obviously has shown the ability to translate that with the Tennessee Titans. But I do think it's a bit of a bad thing because, I don't know, I kind of would have liked to have seen a little bit of some fresh ideas and some fresh mentality with this Patriots team because they feel just a little bit too old school. All that said, though, I think this hire will ultimately work out. I'm extremely excited to see what he can do with a great quarterback like Drake May. Hopefully he can hone in his ability and really put together a system that is really fortunate for him. I also believe they hired Josh McDaniel as their offensive coordinator, which I don't know if I like or if I really dislike. I'm kind of 50-50 on whether I like it or not like it, but we'll have to wait and see how that one goes. I'm going to give this hire an A-. And lastly, the New York Jets hire Aaron Glenn to be their new head coach. Now, I like this hire, but I don't love this hire. Let me explain. I like this hire because I do think Aaron Glenn is the perfect guy to go in there and build a culture, build a foundation, build a roster, and just be somebody that players want to play for, kind of like what Dan Campbell did with the Detroit Lions. The reason why I don't love the hire, though, is because in a lot of ways, he's kind of similar to Robert Saleh, and Robert Saleh wasn't very successful with the New York Jets, even though he had some really good defenses. By the way, shout out Robert Saleh. He's going to San Francisco, and that is a home run hit for San Francisco, by the way. I just personally feel like Aaron Glenn is going to be kind of similar to Robert Saleh with maybe a smidge better time management, a bit better hold on the roster, hold on the culture, whereas for Aaron Glenn, for Robert Saleh, he wasn't quite able to do so. I think that he's going to be somebody that players want to play for. I think he's going to have some really good defenses. I truly do believe this Jets team moving forward should just strictly focus on building this godly defense and just finding a quarterback who can play and just be like top 15 in the NFL, like prime Kirk Cousins type of guy. Never going to be a top 5 quarterback, but just a really solid quarterback, and rely on that defense to make those deep playoff runs. if they can find those pieces, I think this team can be really good really quickly. It's just going to be how quickly can they do it, and well, how does Aaron Glenn work out as a head coach? In a lot of ways, this hire reminds me of the Robert Saleh one, except Robert Saleh maybe was a little bit less experienced and a little bit more of a new face. And we just know what Aaron Glenn's going to bring, but I'm hopeful that Aaron Glenn is going to be different than Robert Saleh in a positive way. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, what are your thoughts on every single hire? And again, if you are a Saints fan who watched this video, once they do announce their hiring of a head coach, I will definitely be putting a community tab post out, so keep an eye out for that. But if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.